One of the things that I sort of have recently discovered, and I think it's worth paying attention to, because I can do it with 3 words that start with the same letter, and if you ever achieve alliteration, you know it's worth paying attention to. But I think in this country, we don't recognize that artists are people, so that they have human needs. They have needs for housing and transportation and food and shelter. Artists are product. They're the things that they produce. And there's a fascinating national survey that was done, I can't remember, 7, 8 years ago, that said 98% of Americans recognize the value of art in their lives. 27% recognize the role of artists. So I think there's a disconnect, and USA Artists was established. Well, no, and USA Artists was established with the tagline, art comes from artists. So I think where the food movement was a decade ago, right, which is we all used to think that steak came from Jerry's IGA down the roll, you know, and we now recognize the role. We don't understand that art comes from artists. We don't understand that, you know, you are that. And then artists are also their process, their way of thinking, their means of problem solving, their means of community engagement. So I think one of the things that's so smart about what Kresge is doing, but Detroit more broadly is doing, is recognizing that artists are valuable as people, as products, and as process, and recognizing all of those needs and all of the strengths. The second thing that I think is so important is that when I began sort of working in this area of creative placemaking, the sentence that most people use in talking with me is, oh, so we'll get artists to move to a place. And so artists are always defined as people who don't live anywhere. They're these aliens who sort of come from somewhere and spend a time and move off. And what's really powerful about Rip and what he just talked about is that it's recognizing that there are artists who live there. There's a way of reading the language of placemaking as almost colonial. Right? There's a way that you can read that language and sort of say there's a place and I've discovered it. I'm Christopher Columbus, there's a blank slate, there are no people, there's no culture, and I'm coming in and I'm making it. And that's not how we use it, and that's not what we mean. There's a wonderful woman that both Rip and I have worked with called Maria Rosario Jackson, who says it's really important to pay attention to your prepositions. Because if you're talking about doing something to a community, that's a leading indicator that something's wrong with the fundamental framing of the project. We're interested in funding projects that communities are doing. Groups of people have come together, identified a need, identified a challenge, and are proposing a solution. So what I love is that in Detroit, you have arguably twice as much city as you need for the current population. So there's plenty of room for people to come and join Detroit. I'm not, saying everyone needs to stay where they are, but there's also a great recognition of people like Powerhouse Productions or Youth Nation or some of the really extraordinary organizations that are dug into Detroit and have been for some time. So I think paying attention to artists and their fulsomeness and also paying attention to the resident artists, the indigenous artists, I think are 2 of the things that Detroit is really getting right.